It's good to be with you this morning, and good to have our visitors with us, and good to see others who've not been able to be with us this morning. Let's just look at Jude here for a second. It's just read for us. We want to look specifically at verse 11. Now, Jude is speaking about false teachers and false prophets. And that's precisely who we're going to be. We're going to be talking about that subject today. Specifically, a prophet for hire. A prophet that was hired by the Moabites to curse Israel. And it didn't turn out the way everyone thought it would turn out. But we'll get to that in a moment. We have this man by the name of Balaam. And Balaam is going to be used as an example. As we have said many times, the Bible uses its own vocabulary and is established something at one part and then began to use that as a type, as a character, as a vocabulary. And Balaam is one of those, but not the only one. If you don't know who Balaam is and what Balaam did, then you certainly can't understand the comparison. Such as, I could name someone in my past. I could describe you as my Uncle Mac, but you probably wouldn't know what that meant because you didn't know my Uncle Mac. But if you did, then you would wonder, how am I like Uncle Mac? Or yeah, I guess I am like your Uncle Mac. But here with the Bible has given us the facts concerning Balaam, and now in Jude, and we're going to also see in 2 Peter and also in the book of Revelation, that Balaam is brought out as an example of a bad prophet, as a prophet for hire. As one man said concerning someone else, that man will hunt with anybody's dog. Well, what does that mean? That means that preacher will preach it however you want it to be preached. If you pay him to preach it to the right, he'll preach it to the right. To the left, he'll preach it to the left. You want him to preach it down the middle, he'll preach it down the middle. Up, left, right, center, it doesn't matter. Just tell him how you want it, and that's the way he'll do it. Well, that type of person has no faith. They may have skill in what they do, but they have no faith and they have no conviction. They'll just preach it however you want. Whatever gets them the job and keeps them in the job, that's the way they'll do it. And with Balaam is going to be offered a lot. And the price goes up. And he obviously is tempted by the offers, obviously. And we see where Balaam is going to come to his end, in fact. But let's go to Jude and verse 11. Woe to them. Now this is speaking of very, very lawless people. Here of people who pretend that they know something, pretend that they have revelation from God, pretend that they can speak for God. Woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain. Oh, once again, the Bible is using a name. If you don't know who Cain is, then you don't know what is being said. Cain was a murderer. We go to Genesis 4 for that. But also, before he was a murderer, and this really plays into what's being described here, he worshiped God in a vain way, in a lawless way, just deciding how he wanted to worship God. Regardless of what God commanded Cain to do, Cain just decides he's going to do what Cain wants to do. So they have gone in the way of Cain. That would be in religious error. That would be worshiping in the wrong way. And I guess we could also throw in murder in that. I can't tell you that. Have run greedy in the error of Balaam for profit. So here is Balaam's name being put out, and they are this way. They've gone the way of Cain. They have the same greed as Balaam for profit. That they are willing to do whatever, say whatever, change whatever, if there's a price attached to it. this type of person would gladly do that. This person is interested in the money, not in righteousness. This is a person that's no doubt eloquent and articulate and probably a very, very smooth personality, charismatic, and able to win people over. But all he's interested in is money. That's all he's interested in. His interest is not with God or with the truth, is how I'll sell it however you're buying it. And perished in the rebellion of Korah. Once again, who is Korah? Well, Korah goes back to the book of Numbers, and it was a rebellion there against God's chosen. Korah, but he's not alone, along with a number of other men that would have been respectable, but they have declared, well, they don't like the fact that Moses has been given the authority he's been given. They would like some of that authority, and Korah, maybe all of it, I don't know. But why does Moses get to do this? And so here we have, and Korah dies in the end of all this. And Balaam does too, but Korah is in demonstration by God. Balaam's actually going to be killed by Israel. But here we have these three names: Cain, Balaam, Korah. What do all three of these have in common? What do all three of them have in common? They have to do with dealing in religious matters, dealings with God. One being vain worship that leads him to murder. The other being that of a prophet for hire. He'll say whatever it is you want him to say. He'll give it a try. He will try to do it. And then the other is trying to usurp authority over those that God has given authority to, trying to take that authority away. Now, let's just go over to 2 Peter, and it is interesting to note that you have individuals like Balaam and Cain and Korah, who are all spoken of in the beginnings of the Bible, really. I guess Korah coming in at the book of Numbers, but now being discussed here at the very end of the Bible, coming to the end of it. So 2 Peter chapter 2, this also has to do with false teachers, false prophets, and we begin in verse 12. But these, like natural brute beasts, made to be caught and destroyed, speak evil of the things they do not understand, and will utterly perish in their own corruption. So they're reveling in their own corruption, they're partying in their own corruption, they're celebrating it, but they're going to perish because of it. It's not going to last very long. They're going to absolutely perish, and will receive the wages of unrighteousness as those who count it pleasure to carouse in the daytime. They are spots and blemishes, carousing in their own deceptions while they feast with us, having eyes full of adultery that cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls. They have a heart trained in covetous practices and are accursed children. They have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. Here, these are being compared to earlier individuals, earlier examples. Those who Peter is writing about would be those who are living in his day, there in the first century, or would be coming up very soon. And that he is describing how they are going to be, and then makes comparison to those in the past. Which means what? First off, it means this. If there were false prophets there in the days of Moses, and there were false prophets and false teachers in the days of the first century where Peter and Jude are both writing them, then we can know that that's not going to stop. There will always be false teachers and false prophets. Now, I have in the bulletin, I've written an article about a peculiar thing that I recently discovered. And it's about two false prophets having their own little battle, which in my mind is quite amusing. But both of them were just outrageous individuals, living across the world from each other, but having their own little duel against each other. False prophets, to me, and we have spoken about this, to me, someone who pretends to speak from God, there's something wrong with that person. There's something wrong with them. They have no fear of God in them. They have no fear. Either they have such a wrecked conscience, which is precisely what's being described in both of these places, 2 Peter and Jude. Either they have a wrecked conscience or they're just mad. They're madmen. They have deceived themselves. Or their madness has just, they're delusional. Something is wrong with such a person that it's enough to just behave how you want to behave. All right, that's wicked enough. But when you then go on to pretend that you're speaking for God, you have crossed a further boundary. You've gone further away now. And it is a serious, serious matter to pretend that you're speaking for God when He has not told you a thing other than what we all receive in the Bible. He's not told you anything. Now, you wouldn't like it if I took a check out of your checkbook and wrote a check and signed your name on it. You wouldn't like it. I would be pretending to be you, or I stole your identity. I took a credit card, I stole your identity, and I'm now making purchases under your name. You wouldn't like that. And you shouldn't like it, obviously. We have laws against such things. But what about someone who pretends not to steal someone, who is not stealing somebody else's identity, but they're pretending to speak for God? They are pretending that they're going to somehow use that against others, use it for their own benefit, use it for their own con game, and there's too many to even list. There's been a lot who've done that. Matter of fact, in the book of Acts, we see the Sanhedrin talking about men who pretended to be something. And when they said pretended to be something, it's either pretended to have been a prophet or pretended to even have been the Christ. This is nothing new. And let us not be naive or deceived. People today can do that same thing, and there are people today that will take folks to the cleaners, as you might say. They will shear them. They will do whatever they can in their little con game of pretending to be someone from God, and they are nothing. Nothing at all. Let's go to Revelation chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2. And we'll just look at verse 14. This concerns things in Pergamos. And he says this concerning the church at Pergamos, but I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. All right. Now here is this individual. Not that this individual, their name is actually Balaam, but who hold the doctrine of Balaam. The doctrine of Balaam. One, that here is someone who is a false teacher. Once again, we have three writers now in the New Testament. We have Jude, we have Peter, now we have John, bringing about this name Balaam to discuss things that are happening that are similar to what Balaam did. A false prophet, a false teacher, someone who is working against God, working against His people, working against righteousness, someone who's just wicked, and putting it all together in this, doing it for the fee, for the advantage that it gives them in way of salary or in way of money and wealth, some way or another. You can throw that in because that's what Balaam represents in all of this. But here, Christ is addressing one of his churches in a specific location, Pergamos, a congregation there, and saying that he has something against them because there's someone there who holds the doctrine of Balaam. So I can't be a child of Christ, a child of God rather, a brother of Christ, and hold the doctrine of Balaam as well? The answer is no, I can't. I can't be a child of God, a Christian, and then also hold some other doctrine out here that's not from the Bible, some other doctrine, and teach it as doctrine? No, I can't. I can't do that. And notice that it is giving in very, very general terms, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel. So whoever this was at Pergamos put a stumbling block there for the Christians at Pergamos. Put a stumbling block there. He or she, probably a he, is teaching something there that is causing them to sin. To eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality. Well, that's exactly what was happening with Balaam. That's what Balaam did, and here is someone, we don't know exactly what they did. Could it have been identical? Yes, it could have been. Yeah, it could have been. But bringing in anything other than the doctrine of Christ is harlotry against him, just as the prophets of the Old Testament, God speaking through those prophets, spoke of Israel committing harlotry against him. We can still commit harlotry against God. We can still do it. And things that, though not specifically, as we were discussing this morning, going to a temple and performing a literal sacrifice in a literal temple, can that happen today? Yes, it can. Could it have happened in the days here when John is writing this? Yeah, it could have happened. But it also could be by way of principle. Something else has been brought in that has nothing to do with the law of Christ. Something else has been brought in there that is a stumbling block, that is like that of making these sacrifices to idols. Because they're not a living sacrifice to God anymore. They're a living sacrifice to something else. And that something else doesn't necessarily have to have a personal name. Let's just make that clear right now. That something else doesn't have to have the name of Diana attached to it. That something else could very well, let's just bring it up to us, it could be that of a hobby. It could be something that we enjoy doing. It could be TV or a game. It could be anything. Anything could be something that we willingly make the sacrifice for that, but not make the sacrifice for God. And therefore, God is replaced in our hearts. But let's get back to that of Balaam. Let's go to Deuteronomy. Actually, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 22. Deuteronomy 22. Beginning in verse 1. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. We want Numbers 22. I was thinking about that. We want Numbers 22. Okay, this is where we want to be. Numbers 22. Let's discuss Balaam for a moment. Balaam is not of Israel. Balaam, in fact, is a prophet. He is. God is going to speak to him, and he knows too much. He's not a writing prophet like Moses was. He's not. But we need to understand that there were prophets in the Gentile world. There were. When we know that of the oracles being given to Israel, yes, that's true. All the written words given to Israel. And you have individuals like Moses that are extraordinarily powerful. But we have to ask questions such as, okay, who was Melchizedek? Melchizedek was not a descendant of Abraham. Wasn't a descendant of Abraham at all. But you have others that are in the Gentile world that they are prophets. And though he turns evil, he's not always evil in his life, evidently. He does some things that are positive. And we see where Balaam begins doing things in a positive way, saying that he's not going to say anything that he's not told to say. He's just limited in that. But he is, in fact, now here's where Deuteronomy 23 comes in. Deuteronomy 23 in verse 4, we find where Balaam is actually from Mesopotamia. That's where he is from. Now we come to Numbers 22, beginning in verse 1. Then the children of Israel moved and camped in the plains of Moab on the side of Jordan across from Jericho. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Amorites were defeated by Israel. And Israel, you have surrounding countries that they know where Israel just came from. They're not ignorant. Anything that happened in Egypt, they knew about. Obviously, they knew about. There were trade routes. People traveled all the time. People who would have witnessed or would have heard from witnesses in Egypt. Everything that occurred, and the fact that where is that Egyptian army that used to be here? Didn't they have an awful lot of chariots? I'm not seeing a single one at the moment. Well, they're in the bottom of the Red Sea, and that's where they're going to stay. They knew things. They knew things. And you have this mass of people coming out of Egypt. And they would have heard about that mysteriously missing army. And then the whisperings of they're at the bottom of the Red Sea. And the next question would be, how does that happen? What, they got on boats? No, they didn't get on boats. Well, how does that even happen? They knew this mass of people, and we are talking about thousands upon thousands. I can't give you a solid number at all. Estimates around 2 million, but that's an estimate. There's no way I can tell you. But the estimates of total is a lot of people, and they have been living in the wilderness for a while, and they're being fed there. How are they being fed? Well, word is they're being fed miraculously by God. I guess they are, because you can't farm out there. How are they making by? And they have their eye on them. And people like Rahab in Jericho, she tells the spies that come there that they know what Israel's been doing. They know what Israel's about to do. Then they are greatly afraid of it. So here is this Balak. He knows what Israel has done to the Amorites. And Moab was exceedingly, verse 3, and Moab was exceedingly afraid of the people because they were many, and Moab was sick with dread because of the children of Israel. So Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this company will lick up everything around us as an ox licks up the grass of the field. And Balak the son of Zippor was king of the Moabites at that time. Then he sent messengers to Balaam the son of Beor at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the sons of his people, to call him, saying, Look, a people has come from Egypt. See, they cover the face of the earth and are setting next to me. Therefore, please come at once. Curse this people for me, for they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. Let's stop right there. Balak has a plan. He knows the Amorites Amalekites, no, it's Amorites, were just destroyed by Israel. And he knows that was a significant powerhouse that they just destroyed. And the likelihood is they're going to do the same thing to Moab. Likelihood is that there's no way they have enough power to take care of this people. If this people turns on them, they have no power to do so. So he has a plan. He calls for Balaam. Balaam's not one of them. Balaam's off somewhere else, as we're saying. He's from Mesopotamia. Balaam, though, has a reputation. Whom you bless is blessed. Whom you curse is cursed. Now, the hope is, let me bring you over here, Balaam. I'm going to pay you a lot. I'm going to give you honors on top of that. You just do what I want you to do. You curse them so that I can defeat them. That's what I want you to do. And that's putting an awful lot of faith in Balaam. That's an awful lot of faith that somehow you think he has this kind of power. That somehow he has the power of well, it would seem to me like Balaam wouldn't have any enemies at all. Because if he cursed you, there's nothing you can do about it. You're done for. And here is this king of the Moabites calling him. And verse 7, so the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the diviner's fee in their hand, and they came to Balaam and spoke to him the words of Balak. And he said to them, Lodge here tonight, and I will, he says to them, all right, they've told him all the words of Balak, lodge here tonight, and I will bring back word to you as the Lord speaks to me. So the princes of Moab stayed with Balaam. Okay, so this is progressing. They have sent these elders of Moab. And so they're not sending just messengers out there. They're sending elders of Moab so that they're showing we're serious about this, and that this is to be taken seriously. This isn't just a whim. This isn't just somebody with a silly idea. It is a silly idea, but take it seriously. We can pay you. We can pay you and are willing to pay you. So, okay, wait here and I will see what God has to say. Verse 9. Then God came to Balaam. This is something that happened with Balaam. God came to him. And said, Who are these men with you? And Balaam's very honest. So Balaam said to God, Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, has sent to me, saying, Look, a people has come out of Egypt, and they cover the face of the earth. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I shall be able to overpower them and drive them out. And God said to Balaam, You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. That would be it. That's it. Now, one might say that Balaam had already gone too far in this, that Balaam should have already known that this is a wicked thing, and I'm not going to do that. But he's going to entertain the idea. He's going to inquire of God, and now God gives him the answer. You're not going to curse them. You're not going to go with them. You're send them on their way, because this people, Israel, happens to be blessed. They are blessed. That should be the end, but it's not. That should be the end of Balaam now just I'm not entertaining this idea anymore because God is quite adamant about it. To proceed any further, which He's going to do, to proceed any further is going to test the patience of God. Okay? I come to you and I say, I want your car in your house. And you tell me, no. And then I come to you again, next day, and I say, and I want your car in your house. And you say, no, I just told you yesterday, I'm not going to give you my car in my house. And I keep pursuing it. And you think, what is wrong with you? I have told you already. You don't need to ask. As a matter of fact, it was dumb to ask the first time. You knew what I was going to say. But you keep coming back. The answer is no. The answer is no. It's not happening. This is what God is saying. That's enough. It's enough. Now, He's going to continue pursuing because He's got clients that want to continue to pursue this. He's got paying clients, and their price keeps going up and up and up. And so He's not going to quit. He's not going to quit. But what is going to be revealed is what God says here in 22, so Numbers 22, verse 12, is precisely what He means all the way around. This is precisely what He means. And every time He calls on God of what should be done to this people, God gives a message that Moab doesn't want. Let's just go to chapter 24 and verse 3. And we're not reading everything here. We only have time to sample this. Then he looked up, and this is Balaam. Looked up. Took up his oracle and said, the utterance of Balaam, the son of Beor, the utterance of the man whose eyes are open, the utterance of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, who falls down with eyes wide open. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. This is already starting off bad. All right, this is not what I am paying you for. You are blessing them yet again. All right, it's time for everybody to reconsider their position on everything. It's time for Balaam to just stop, go on home. He's already gone too far. Time for Balaam to just stop all this. Because it's already from chapter 22, things are not going to change. You think God is going to change His mind on this? Because He's not. He's not going to change His mind on this. And you think that Balaam somehow is going to be able to ask God so many times that God is going to, okay, well, Balaam, since you're such a righteous man, never mind my plans in saving humanity. You're serious about this, so I guess we let this go and we'll just curse Israel. I guess we'll let this go. Now, he continues on. Verse 6, so Numbers 24, verse 6, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens by the riverside, like aloes planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the water, He shall pour water from His buckets, and His seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and His kingdom shall be exalted. This does not sound like a curse. This sounds the opposite. Now, let's talk about Balak for a minute. It's time for Balak to reconsider what he's doing, because he keeps upping the price and things are getting worse and worse for him, because he's already made note that everyone that Balaam blesses is blessed. Well, that's what he keeps on doing. All right? Where you're going is a dead end. Get it in your head. It's a dead end. They may kill us. Well, reconsider your position. Maybe your position ought to be sympathy and compassion and friendship rather than opposition to Israel. Maybe that's what it ought to be. Rethink. And here is a lesson for us. There are certain things God's not going to do. He's not going to do it. And it doesn't matter how many prayers you make. He's not going to do it. He's not going to save someone except by the prescribed and commanded way in the Bible. He's not going to change. He's not going to change His way of salvation, which is set and universal and eternal. He's not going to change that for a prayer. He's not going to do it. He's not going to make it to where there is yet another way to God. There's Christ, and now because of your prayers, there's another way. He's not going to curse Christ. He's not going to curse His church. He's not going to do any of those things, regardless of the amount of prayer. He's not going to do it. There are certain things God will not do. And the last thing we want to be is an enemy against God. And sometimes we need to reconsider our life and our position with God. Instead of being an enemy to Christ and His church, maybe it is to be a follower of Christ and be in His church. Maybe that's what we need to do. And I will change that to that's precisely what we need to do. And something that we think ought to happen, God may have a completely different idea of what ought to happen. He has the idea of true justice. He has the idea of true righteousness and follows both. Of true holiness. And we may have it in our mind what is just, what is righteous, what is holy, what is true, and it may not be any of those things at all. In our head it may be, but with Him, He knows far better than us. Now, we just want to make mention, because we don't have a whole lot of time, we want to make mention what exactly happened here. We go to chapter 25, so Numbers 25, and we just see this. Because Israel does something that brings God against them, but that's nothing new. That's nothing new. We're in the book of Numbers. This has already been going on. Where they are faithful to Him, God protects them. God is with them. When they veer off and just become idolatrous, they become just sinful, then their relationship changes. Now Israel, verse 1, so Numbers 25, verse 1. Now Israel remained in Acacia Grove, and the people began to commit harlotry with the women of Moab. This is how it's done. You want God against them? This is how it's going to be done. And this is coming from Balaam, as a matter of fact. We discover this is his doing. And they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. How does God go against Israel? At their corruption. So, an enemy against Israel, what should they do then? Corrupt Israel. Corrupt them. Make them just as corrupt as the rest of the world. Just as idolatrous. Just as much of a harlot as anybody else. And then God is against them. That's how it's done. But we do see where, let's go to Numbers 31 very quickly. Numbers 31 and in verse 16 we see these words. Look, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. This was Balaam's doing. Balaam finally got his money. He finally got his money because this was his counsel. You want to get Israel? This, you can't do it this other way, but I'll show you how it's done. And it seems as though Balaam is speaking for God, and he just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, and his reward keeps increasing in all this. But we also see in verse 8, Numbers 31 and verse 8, they killed the kings of Midian with the rest of those who were killed, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. Balaam, the son of Beor, they also killed with the sword. Oh, he doesn't get a whole lot of time with that bounty. He doesn't have a whole lot of time to enjoy those wages of unrighteousness. He doesn't get a whole lot of time, and nobody does. Nobody does. Trust me, if you were given an extraordinary price for some wickedness, it doesn't matter how long you think you may live on this earth, it will never be long enough, because eventually death finds us all. And eternity will not be something that where everything in this, every evil in this life has been justified. Eternity will never, ever be so light that the pleasures we may have or the enjoyment we may have in this life will outweigh it. It will never. This is a flash in the pan, as we often describe it. This is just a moment, and then it's over. Then there is eternity. This is just our test. This is the testing ground. That's all we have here. And it is to be serious about our condition. What's our condition? Our condition is we have been created in the image of God. Our condition is we are loved by God, but we can fall away from Him. And we can be an enemy of Christ. And we can find ourselves on the wrong side of things, to be condemned by God. God wants obedience out of us. He created us. He wants obedience out of us. He wants proper servants out of us. He also wants children, not just servants or slaves, but He wants children, and proper children who love Him. It's from the heart. Mind, soul, strength, every part of our being. That's what He wants out of us. He created us for this purpose, and He has given us a job to do, a purpose in our existence. And we are to commit ourselves to that purpose. And that purpose is serving Him in every way that we can. All of us have different talents. All of us are in different situations, but all of us can do something. Balaam, a corrupter, a prophet for hire, a man that will just try whatever he needs to do for the price. We still have those today. They're still around. But by the grace and the providence of God, we also have the Word of God. We don't have any man in between us and God. We have His words directly, so we can go and find out directly from Him what He wants from us. We ask this morning, if you need to respond to the invitation, if we can help in any way, that you come as we stand and sing.